Hello, my name is Dr. Evan Hughes and welcome to the Vitality Project. Today we're going to be talking about the function of nerves and a thing called myelination. Also transneural degeneration, which is a word I've been carrying around since school and couldn't wait to use, and so we're putting together this segment for you. Nerves are how we interact with the world. We have our consciousness, we talk about it being stored in the brain, there are gut reactions, but the central nervous system reaches out and experiences what we do and can express force and receive senses through the nervous system. So I want to talk a little bit about the anatomy of nerves, and if you understand them and you start to grok, if you will, the concepts of how they function, you can use them, use that knowledge to develop yourself and your skills. So an interesting thing about nerves, it starts with the cell body. The cell bodies for nerves are only in the central nervous system, that is the brain and the spinal cord. There are no nerve cell bodies in the extremities or outside into the rib cage. It's very interesting now. The connections are there, but the cell bodies themselves require specific amounts of fuel and exactly the right environment for them to do the work that nerves do. And so Mother Nature has put them in the center, inside a sac of the spinal cord, in a fluid called cerebrospinal fluid. Now this fluid has been filtered. The blood is not clean enough for nerves. It's been filtered out through wells and lakes, if you will, called ventricles in the head. And it travels throughout and circulates. One of the purposes of chiropractic care is to make sure that the cerebrospinal fluid moves freely so it nourishes your nerve cells. Cell bodies. Now, cell body has two major components for receiving and transmitting information. One is called the dendrites. This is a Latin word that derives from tree, or it was Greek. But it's a derivative of tree because of the way the dendrites spread out from that cell body, ready to receive information. And the signal travels along the dendrite to the cell's center, where the cell then gets to make a decision as to what it's time to do, to pass the signal on or to wiggle your left foot. Then, from that cell body extends out a thing called an axon. Now the axons are the reasons we can get a nerve all the way to our big toe and wiggle it, even though the cell body is in the spinal cord. The axons in a basketball player can be as long as 3 feet, and it has to travel with a signal all the way down and then back up when it's been activated. Whether it's the position of the toe, pain, or heat, those information is traveling across these wires. Here's the interesting part. The information travels through a combination of electricity, similar to the electricity we have in our house, or even fiber optic cables. But it's a bit different from that. There's also a chemical component. As chemicals move throughout the line, there's a switch of calcium and sodium, different minerals and things that have to be maintained along this wire. And when it gets to the end, there's another chemical reaction that passes the signal. Here's where myelination kicks in. If it's simply moving down a nerve fiber by itself, the signal wants to jump. It doesn't move straight like a regular cord. It has to do with conduction and how it's maintained. The myelin sheath is a protein that wraps itself around the axon, which is the wire leaving the cell body. The more that protein wraps and the more tightly it wraps, the further the signal can jump and the more efficiently the signal moves down to wherever it needs to go. I keep pointing to my feet. It could go anywhere. And so to give you an example, someone who practices tennis and the same motion every single day, every time that nerve fiber fires, it wraps the myelin more tightly around the nerve. The signal becomes faster, and the person's tennis swing becomes that much smoother and that much stronger because the body's able to activate using less energy. If I tried to ride a unicycle, maybe by the end of the day and a few bumps and bruises, I could kind of stay up and on top of it. But for sure, I would be drenched in sweat and exhausted. Someone who rides a unicycle all the time can do that and juggle and carry on a conversation on the cell phone. The myelin sheaths and proteins around that person's axons to their nerves have been well established in the specific pathways that allowed them to ride the unicycle. Now, the unicycle is a fun example. but it's anything that you choose to do physically. It begins to wrap these fibers up. So an interesting question. Mother Nature's so smart, and she is. When she put us together, she didn't make any mistakes. Why don't we have myelin sheaths all over everything all of the time? And the answer is this. It's expensive. To maintain the nervous system requires a lot of fuel, and it requires a lot of focus. And so old Mother Nature said, we need some energy to maintain ourselves and to be able to adapt. So I'll let you specialize if you prove it, that you really want those nerves with good myelin sheathing. And so by practice, repetition, and a lot of frequency, you begin to wind the fibers tighter and tighter. If you don't fire that pathway, the fibers begin to unwind and the myelin becomes less prominent. And this is why if you don't practice the skill for weeks, months, or years, it takes a moment for you to get it back. The body has to almost remember, if you will, on the cellular level and lock those myelin proteins back down. Now, on to transneural degeneration. Since the nerves need to be excited and activated to stay healthy and vibrant, if there are a bunch of nerves in a chain, let's say I go to move my arm, there are thousands of nerves involved in this process. Let's say I damage one of the critical nerves that activates that pattern. All of its buddies are now getting less stimulation. And so if I have one nerve that dies or is dormant or is injured, all the rest of them begin to get less and they begin to degenerate throughout the entire system. And it works its way up through the pathway. All right? One of the functions of chiropractic care is to adjust a person, bring those nerves back online, centering the system and allowing connections to take place in the body to reactivate. Now, when I talk about degeneration, it's a cellular process. To turn a nerve on takes a second. To repair a nerve is a cellular process. It takes time. And that has to do with how much fuel and food is available to the nervous system and how widespread the effects are of that degeneration. But it regenerates in the same way. The frequency of one set of nerves activates the frequency of another set of nerves. This is why exercise is extremely powerful for the brain and influences our ability to think. Additionally, the more you think, the more you can think. I've been talking about nerves outside the body, but the myelin sheaths exist inside the brain as well as the nerve cells talk to each other. Somebody who is a math major or they're in physics calculates much faster to somebody who's an expert bricklayer about certain subjects. But the bricklayer can diagnose a wall much faster. Whatever your specialty is where your myelin sheaths have been laid down and the cells are supporting that pathway of thinking throughout your nervous system. Knowledge about how to use your cells hopefully make you a little bit patient. If you keep firing them and you keep working, you can develop skills, you can develop strengths, and it gives you something to look forward to as you get older. My son is 4 years old, and I'm watching him develop more and more pathways within himself, and it's exciting to watch. And it re-inspires me to take the skills I've been working on for so long and develop a little more pathway, work a little bit further, and get my myelin sheath that much stronger so that I can be the absolute best I can be. My name is Dr. Evan Hughes, and thank you for joining us for the Vitality Project.